So we're moving into a new section now, section 4, and this section is going to deal with the band descriptor category of lexical resource, which is basically vocabulary. And this section is going to be divided into 3 parts and then another part on the end. And the first 3 lectures are going to deal with useful and typical language, which appears across those 3 different letter tones, the informal, the semi-formal and the formal. And the last lecture of this section will talk more about how we can learn how to paraphrase, different techniques for paraphrasing, things like collocation and spelling, and so forth. But the bulk of this section dealing with expressions that you can use across the different tones and looking at different purposes as well. And we're going to start by looking at informal letters. And in each of these lectures, we're just going to have a quick introduction before we look at the vocabulary exercises. So, as I say, informal letter is the first that we're looking at. Letter writing is different to writing in any other format. Much of the language that you see in letters is rarely seen in other written formats. This goes for all of the tones, the informal, the semi-formal and the formal, but it's probably most noticeable with regards to the formal, which we'll look at in the 3rd lecture in this section. We'll start, as I said, by looking at informal letter vocabulary. What you should notice as we go through this, and you may have noticed already, is that the language in informal letters often sounds like spoken language between close relations. So maybe a casual chat between friends. That's the aim that we should be going for. There are a couple of exceptions depending on whom you are writing to, but on the whole, that is the vibe we should be trying to achieve. Because of this, a good tip is to listen to conversations between friends and family members when they're speaking English, whether that's artificial, such as scripted dialogues in films, books, TV, or whether it's genuine. Maybe eavesdropping on the train, listening to people's conversations. I know that's kind of an invasion of privacy, but as a form of English practice, it can be quite useful. Listening to unscripted radio shows as well is very good. Think about which words and expressions, as you're listening to these conversations, might fit well in an informal letter, but not a formal one, or maybe even not a semi-formal one. Now, with that out the way, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 expressions for a number of different letter purposes. And there is an exercise in each of these slides. So there'll be 3 expressions, 3 exercises to go with them. We're going to start by looking at the apology and condolence letter. So saying sorry that you've done something or sorry that something has happened to somebody else. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put the expressions on the screen, but the words will be in the wrong order. So you have to put them in the right order. And we're going to follow that up with an example with that expression missing. This is a super easy one to get you started because there's really only 2 constructions it could possibly be. So very easy to work out this one. But we're going to look at them all together at the end. So we start with this one. And we have this one here. And a shame such at the end there, and another example. So what I want you to do in each case is to just pause the video and see if you can put the words in the right order, and then when you're ready, we can continue. Okay, now this is definitely the easiest of all of the exercises, so don't worry, they won't all be this easy, but let's have a look at them here. Okay, so we start with apologies for, and an example. Apologies for getting back to you so late. Work's been mad recently. Notice the contraction, works, instead of work has, and vocabulary like mad. And as we go through these exercises, I want you to think about some of the other useful vocabulary that you could use, a bit more individual, a bit more isolated rather than expressions, but which could be useful. Mad meaning crazy, meaning very, very busy. Next one, I'm so sorry. Nice and simple. I'm so sorry to hear about your loss. I can't imagine what you must be going through. Another nice expression at the end there, I can't imagine what you must be going through. Notice there's nothing too complicated here, nothing too complex, nothing too out of the ordinary. That's because it's an informal letter. In an informal letter, you're not trying to show off your vocabulary to a friend, but at the same time, there are expressions which will demonstrate to the examiner that you have a wide-ranging vocabulary. Things like, I can't imagine what you must be going through. And the last one there, such a shame. An example, I'm sorry that you didn't get to the next round of the competition. That's such a shame. Shame here not being used in the sense of guilt, but really just, I'm sorry that it happened. My condolences to you for that. If we go to the next one, we're looking at invitation letters. Again, let's put some expressions on the screen and I want you to see if you can put the words in the right order. Again, it's quite a simple one. We're going to start with the easier ones, get more difficult later. So pause the screen here, see if you can get the words in the right order. When you're ready, press play. Okay, so let's have a look. We're going to start with, are you free? Nice and simple, are you free? Again, not complicated, but we're using the word free in probably a different way to you're used to using it. So it's not like free as in price or money, but free as in available. And saying, are you available, sounds a touch formal, so free is better. We're having a little get together on Friday night. Are you free? Nice and simple. Why don't you? This is a really nice one. As we're introducing a question, we're kind of mixing up the grammar here. Notice the contraction as well. In fact, why don't you come and stay with us this summer? And the last one, you should come along. Okay, so just saying you should do something, but come along, come to the party. So we're using that preposition along, an expression, come along, we're using it in the right way. It's Rachel's birthday at the weekend and she's throwing a little party. You should definitely come along. We've added a definitely in here. You don't have to. It just helps to emphasize things a little bit. Moving on to thank you letters. Again, same thing. Putting down the exercises here. And if you think you've got the words in the right order, you can continue with the video. Let's have a look. Let's look at the first one. So we have a thanks so much for. Thanks so much for. Thanks so much for giving me a hand this weekend. Giving me a hand, giving me some help. You're an absolute lifesaver. Again, very nice idiomatic vocabulary, close friends perhaps, or close relatives. Absolute lifesaver, you really, really helped me. We're just emphasizing how grateful we are. But we wouldn't write something like, I want to express my immense gratitude or something like that. It's just not appropriate and you will lose marks for task achievement if you write something like that, despite the fact it may sound better to you. Next one, a huge thanks or a huge thank you. So we can use it like a noun. Just writing to say a huge thanks, a huge thank you for putting us up last month. Now, if you remove that indefinite article, that doesn't sound right. If you say just writing to say huge thanks or huge thank you without a, that doesn't sound right at all. And the last one, can't thank you enough or massively appreciated. These are quite useful when they're near one another, but you can separate them as well. Here's an example. I can't thank you enough for what you did for Sarah on Tuesday. It was massively appreciated. Again, really strong gratitude being shown here. Let's think about request letters. Okay, same thing, except this time things are getting a little bit trickier. So to help you out, what I've done is I have, for the second and third exercises, put words in groups. So instead of, the sentences would be quite long. So to look at the words individually and put them in the right order would be quite challenging. So they're in groups, you just need to move the groups around. But the first one's as usual. So again, press pause, and when you're ready, press play. Okay, let's have a look. First one, just wanted to ask about. We often use this just when we're in an informal letter. Comes up quite a bit in a semi-formal letter as well, depending on the context. But notice that we can remove the subject. We can omit the subject. It's implied. It just helps to add this more casual, informal vibe. Just wanted to ask about how you managed to find that job in London. Nice and simple. You wouldn't happen to something, 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 would you? Notice at the end here, you have that question tag like you would use when you were speaking. So that's why it's being used here, to imitate that speaking, conversational vibe. You wouldn't happen to have a tent I could borrow for the weekend, would you? This is a really useful one because it shows your understanding of punctuation as well and inversion as well. Last one, you couldn't do me a huge favour, could you? Again, same thing, question tag, inversion, really useful. But here we can remove the content and put it outside of the expression. So you couldn't do me a huge favour, could you? I really need someone to come and have a tinker with my PC to see what's wrong with it. That's a really useful one here because the content is much longer than just can I borrow a tent, for example. Okay. Advice letters. Another one here. We've got some more challenging ones. Okay, well the first one, I've grouped the language. Second and third, a bit easier, you just need to move those words around. And when you're ready, you can press play. Okay, let's have a look. Now, advice letters are a really, really good opportunity to include conditional sentences. And here are a couple of examples. If you ask me, I think you should. If you ask me, I think you should. If you ask me, I think you should talk to him and be honest about how you feel. We know that we're being asked in a way. The person's asked us for advice. We can still write this. We can still write, if you ask me. It's a pretty typical thing that we would say even if we were being asked for our advice, so it's okay to include it. Next one, if I were you. If I were you. Notice there's a different conditional being used here. If I were you, it's because you are only you are nobody else. So this is a hypothetical, impossible situation, but a very common expression that we use, but it gives you the opportunity to use the second conditional. If I were you, I'd get out of that job as soon as possible and find something that isn't so soul destroying. Again, quite informal vocabulary being used. And this last one here is quite a useful one for when you maybe want to introduce a list of different pieces of advice. Here's what I would do. I'm not sure what the best move is in this situation, but here's what I would do. First of all, I'd yada yada yada. Secondly, I'd do whatever it might be. But notice we're using would because again, it's an impossible situation. It's a hypothetical situation. Okay, let's move on to the next lot. We're looking at complaint letters here. And again, here are the expressions. We have a couple of, well, we have one that's in groups and the other two just put the words in the right order. When you're ready, hit play. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Okay, so first one, I'm sorry to have to bring this up, but. So I don't know if this would be the same with Americans, but it's certainly the case with the British. We tend to apologize for almost everything, even when we're complaining. And it's a bit different, I think, when you're writing a complaint letter in an informal way, because you're probably writing to a friend about something you're upset about, and really you are sorry that you have to bring it up. You don't like doing it, so we often write that. I'm sorry to have to bring this up, but I'm really quite upset about how you reacted to our news last week. Still contractions, even though it's a complaint letter, you can still write it in an informal style. Next one, I feel rather let down. It's quite disappointed, let down, disappointed, and phrasal verbs are often a little bit better in informal letters. I feel rather let down by the lack of contact I've received from you since moving to the city. And lastly, simply isn't good enough. This one's quite strong. We're actually quite angry here. We had such high hopes for this partnership, but your work simply wasn't good enough. That one's a bit of a strange example. It seems like a work situation. Perhaps it would be better in a formal or at least semi-formal, but who knows? You may have gone into work with a friend. Maybe you tried to set up a business with a friend. Could be the case there. It has happened in IELTS before, talking about businesses with friends. So you've got to be prepared for that too. Okay, now we're going to close by looking at letter endings for informal letters. And usually the case, or what I like to do, is add a particular expression and then close with the closing expressions like kind regards, best regards, etc. But it's good to actually have a line before that as well. For example, hope to hear from you soon. Now I've put that exclamation mark in brackets there to suggest that you can add it and you can also not add it. It probably depends on the tone of your letter, what you've said beforehand. If you've written like a letter of condolence, you're very sorry that something's happened to someone, you probably wouldn't add an exclamation mark. It seems to suggest quite a jolly tone, but it could be appropriate in other letter purposes. Same thing, look forward to hearing from you. You can add it, end it with a full stop, or you can end it with an exclamation mark. Just get back to me when you can. No rush. Again, same thing, but only with the no rush. And this one doesn't really seem to lend itself to an exclamation mark, but just let me know if you need anything on my end. Like, it's kind of another way of saying, please let me know if you have any questions, any more questions, but that's more semi-formal, formal. And finally, we end with something like best, comma, and on the next line, you finish with your name, really just your first name, as it's an informal letter. And cheers, thanks. Depending on the letter tone, could be useful as well, particularly if you've made a request of someone, then you can say cheers or thanks at the end there. Okay, so that was informal vocabulary across a variety of different purposes. I hope those exercises help to cement those expressions in your mind just a little bit more. If you didn't do those exercises, I really would recommend that you do them, because they do help to instill that vocabulary a little bit more in your mind. And now we're going to move on to looking at semi-formal letters.